Here we are then. So here we are with Tom. Tom is somebody that I've coached for probably just over a year now. And he's in with me, would you say once every month, once every 6 weeks? And the reason for that is because Tom is doing excellently well. And I thought, and he's very happily accepted to come on the channel and do a video and spread some hope, spread some awareness of how you can be at rock bottom of OCD and ultimately get to a very good place today. So, Tom, if we start with when you first came in, how you felt, what you were going through, your fears, what made you reach out, Tom?
Oh, well, I mean, it's been on and off for years, but the real pinnacle, what I'd say low, when it really started was about 2 years ago. And basically, for my theme, for those who don't know, is relationship OCD or like cheating OCD, sort of chronic guilt about thoughts about relationships, so on and so forth. Um, yeah, I would get basically the most well, I would get a horrible sensation of grief or strong intrusive thoughts, fear of unable to sit with the uncertainty of certain things. But the real low is when I got back with my partner now. But this was about 2 years ago, and she like we got together, but I didn't really understand what was fully going wrong with myself.
Yeah.
I thought I had some sort of like relationship phobia or something, but I didn't have a clue. Like I thought I had done the work, but I hadn't. And
Yeah.
then one day, an intrusive thought came into my mind, and basically from then on, from the time I got up to the time I went to sleep, I was in like constant panic,
Yeah.
fear, like fear of I was going to hurt this person incredibly badly, all
Yeah.
sorts of intrusive thoughts going through my mind. Like
And how
you've
did you
just
feel in
done
that
this.
moment, Tom? How did you feel in that moment?
Oh,
Did you feel totally trapped?
I felt trapped. I felt dreadful. I felt so low because in my mind, I was dragging this person back and I'm going to ruin their lives at the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
it was quite literally from the time I got up to the time I went to sleep, I was in panic. And there was about 2 seconds when I would get up in the morning where I had peace, and then it'd all just go boom, switch on again, and off we go again. And at the time, I was finding incredibly hard to it it was basically far worse than I've ever had anxiety or OCD. I've had it on and off over the years, but I didn't know about it. But this
Yeah.
was just so much worse than anything I had prior to that point. But it was at that point where I was like, I really do need to do something about this. I need to change my life.
Yeah.
So that's when I got in contact with Rob and OCD recovery because I mean I didn't even know it was OCD at the time or anything along those lines. But
How
I
did you
started
find the
seeing the
channel?
videos.
How did you find the page? How did you find OCD recovery?
So I just sort of, I basically wanted to go around like anxiety, intrusive thoughts. These things started coming into my mind, and then a couple of Rob and videos, and I'm not sure if you were making videos this time, Sam, but like it was maybe Nick or Moment, and they started popping up on the screen. I'd watch it and I'd be like, oh my goodness, this is me, this is me,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is me, and then I just knew I had to get in contact with you guys, and that's what
Yeah.
I've done.
And this is why I wanted to speak to you, Tom, because ROCD is so relatable for so many people. Like, think how many people now are watching this video that haven't yet reached out for help and they're just thinking, like, what is going on? And they're hearing you speak and they probably relate to every word that you said, right? The sudden intrusive thought, or like they're almost like the sudden realization, like, oh my God, that kind of thing, right? Where you feel totally lost and totally trapped and you're wallowing in doubt. You just feel like you're drowning in doubt. You don't know where to turn. It's like being in a maze that you can't escape, right? Because with our OCD, you feel so trapped because both options seem closed, meaning that if you stayed, you've then got those fears related to that. And obviously, if you leave, you've got fears related to that.
Fear of,
So you feel boxed in. It's like, well, what do I do? And this is why you're super relatable, Tom. And this is why I was desperate to have you on the channel because people can relate to that in so many ways.
yeah.
So, Tom, what would you say that you did to start making progress? What was the biggest thing for you to start? What got you to seeing a shift in your journey? Would you say?
Well, first off is obviously without pushing it, obviously, but get in contact with you guys and start basically getting on the path that these guys reiterate time and time again. It's not a waste of time. It genuinely is, and it's some of the most important stuff I've learned in my life. But basically, um, it was starting off like, we've got some books on the reading list. Have you had a look at these books? And I was like, no, I barely read. So that's the first thing, you know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I was the same, Tom. I was like, how can a book solve me? Like, what's a book gonna bloody do? Right? Because you're so consumed in how you feel, aren't you? You're like, how can I read this book and make all that go away? But over time, as you start picking away at it, you think, ah, right, I can see what he's saying here. How can
yeah,
I apply that principle and that philosophy to my specific fear? And then the cogs start turning.
yeah. Exactly. And I mean, like, you know, you look at how to stubbornly refuse to make yourself miserable about anything, yes, anything. That is one of the most important books I've ever read, ever. I mean, like, it's basically sort of based a lot of my philosophy of life now because of the
Mm,
stuff that kind of teaches you that. And obviously, like, the myth of self-esteem as well, another massive one as well. I mean,
yeah.
the whole reading list is really important.
Mm.
But those two books are absolutely
So,
essential.
so with our OCD, what did you find especially helpful from the books related to your ROCD? Like the demands you were holding on relationships, how you were viewing relationships in general.
Yeah, well, it was just giving me that ability to sort of break down what was going on in my mind. And like, so before, intrusive thought, that must mean something. I must figure this out. I must get an answer. I must confess this, so on and so forth. But it sort of went, right, okay, you're getting this intrusive thought. Um, why is it intrusive? What
Mm,
it makes you look inside yourself. It takes you away from the external and brings you to the internal and start going, okay, it's actually something inside me. Now I understand that. That's already a massive door opened. And
yeah,
then it gave me the tools then to break down those things and I.e. rationalize those things. So I felt um not at peace, but like, you move from unhealthy disturbance to healthy disturbance, and
yeah,
that's what really happened to me, well, from those books. And obviously going on from there was moving on to the one-to-one sessions alongside. So I was doing this work and I was also having the
yeah,
one-to-one sessions. And the best thing about them is the accountability side of things. It keeps you on track. It makes sure you keep yourself accountable. It's when you do have important questions, you can ask them and you're in a safe environment to do so rather than looking for potentially reassurance or something like that. And these guys will just set you on the straight and narrow. But yeah.
yeah. So Tom, what kind of compulsions was your worst, if as such? So what did you keep slipping up with? Right, because as you know, when you come on the journey, you know that compulsions are the problem, right? Yes, the beliefs have to be changed, the perspective has to be shifted, but that takes time. That just can't be done like that, right? You know that. That just gradually seeps into place. But with compulsions, we know we have to cut them, right? That doesn't happen immediately, but we know that, hey, you've got to cut these compulsions. So in relation to your ROCD journey, Tom, what was it that you kept, or what did you find most difficult cutting, compulsions wise?
I suppose it was maybe like a bit like yourself, maybe a bit of the confessing. It was
Mm.
the
Yeah, very common.
because I had a very high level of guilt initially,
Yeah.
like for what I was thinking, but it was like just sitting with that, like genuinely, you won't get anything from venting or like trying to seek that reassurance because like these guys talk time and time again, reassurance it just doesn't
What kind
lead
of
to anything.
reassurance were you seeking, Tom? What answer were you looking for?
Well, at the time, I thought I was going to really hurt this person, right? So this is prior to getting back with her properly, but like we sort of always seen each other on and off. And I would be like, this has to end at some point. Otherwise, I'm going to ruin this girl. She's going to get too much in love with me that's going to ruin everything. I went, I would sort of basically ring up and I'd be like, I can't do this anymore. And I'd keep saying that
Mm.
until she would basically sort of say, look, Tom, I understand this is going to end at some point. We're all going to separate ways at that. And that would be that reassurance. I'd feel great for 6 months or 6 weeks, and then
Yeah,
a huge burden would come again, chronic guilt. But I didn't understand this at all at the time. I just kept
yeah,
getting reassurance, 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 but it always comes back. It never fixed anything. So
yeah,
that was one of the bad ones.
yeah, yeah. And like you say, then any amount of confession, any amount of venting, any amount of reassurance, googling, any amount of trying to get to the bottom, i.e., chasing certainty,
That
it
Googling,
never delivered on its promise, ever did it? Because if you got relief and then because it was only temporarily, it's then the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. So what made you really see, Tom, that hey, what I'm doing here compulsively isn't working?
I mean, obviously, I probably, to be honest, wouldn't have figured it out if it wasn't for OCD recovery and the process they took me through. I think I would have just kept going down the rabbit hole. I wouldn't known. I would have just assumed I'm broken and this is just who I am.
Yeah.
But if it
So what
wasn't for like, sorry, go on.
so what did you do to change, Tom?
Well, I basically hit rock bottom. I was like, this, I couldn't really. I wasn't like, I was never suicidal or anything like that, but I was in a very low point. It was like, there is clearly something about how I think and what I do is not like it correct. And I felt like I needed to get to the bottom of it. And I had never made more progress until I came with you guys. And literally, I had spoken to psychiatrists before, I had had therapists um, multiple times over the years. Think I'd get on top of it, and it just wouldn't get anywhere. Um,
Yeah.
and it's
That's
not their fault. They don't understand it the same way you guys do. They try the best, but it's just, yeah.
right. And how long would it say it took you? And this is crucial, Tom, because lots of people come in and have an unrealistic expectation of how long it takes to get better. The most frustrating thing as a coach, truly, I don't like saying it, but I have to, is the time and patience element. I wish that you could come in and you could be fixed and off you go again on your merry way. But it doesn't work like that. So, Tom, please shed some realism on this. How long would you say it took you to start seeing noticeable shifts and ultimately a decrease in disturbance?
So nobody needs to do recovery the same way I did, but it took. Well, first off, you've got to get in the mindset. It's got to take as long as it needs to take. But
Yeah,
for me to start feeling shifts, it took me like, and this is like minimal shifts. It took me about 6 months of tough work. I really did knuckle down, and I went into disputing very hard. Not compulsive. Initially, it was compulsive. Of course,
yeah,
everyone does it compulsive initially, but I found a good habit, a good healthy habit, and I just sort of stuck to it, and I kept breaking down, repetition, repetition. But the thing is, though, it really does take time because you have to embody this new rational belief. You can't just switch a light because your body knows you're lying to yourself. So
yeah.
you must not put a time frame on this. And you'll
You've
find
got
the
to
fact
be,
that you release yourself more to the actual process, the more progress you will make because you
that's
remove
so
yourself from that
critical.
need, that dire need to be better.
So that's super, super critical. Once somebody realizes on the journey that it sounds contradictory, it sounds conflicting, but when you realize you don't have to recover, like you don't need to recover, that doesn't mean you give up all the work, right? And OCD sufferer tends to go to the extreme, one extreme to the other. Either it's all they think about is OCD, recovery work, or they just do nothing at all, right? So it's finding that balance, it's finding that sweet spot, but knowing that even if this didn't work out, right? Because it's learning to accept that. You have to accept that OCD may be here forever. I have to accept that. Tom had to accept that. Everybody has to accept that. Because if you can't, you are then trying to forcefully get rid of OCD. You are trying to rush it. You're doing all you can to get rid of it. And that isn't going to work because it's going to dig its heels in and it's going to cling in there. So as you can see what Tom has done here, he went overboard because that got compulsive. So he sort of reined that in, but he still lived his life whilst putting in recovery work on the side. And that's what's crucial. Because then as he started to accept that, hey, I may never recover, but he still strived to get better, right? So he kept it healthy. It was a healthy desire to recover, but he never needed to. Therefore, the compulsive disputing, the compulsive chasing came down. And I think that's what's crucial in Tom's journey.
No, completely agree.
So where would you say you are today, Tom?
Well, let's put this in perspective. So I've been now with my partner for nearly 2 years. Well, no, sorry, about a year now.
Yeah.
Um, we've known each other on and off over the years, obviously. So
And
that
your
was like,
thoughts, your intrusive thoughts when they first hit was more sort of the emotionally harming them, right? So what happens if I leave them, right? What happens if I cheat on them and then they're heartbroken? It was more that kind of thing, or ruin their life kind of thing, wasn't it?
yeah, I felt very responsible for them at the time and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. But
And your brain's looking for anything. OCD is looking for anything where Tom could have been at fault. What
yeah.
if you didn't tell him this? Hence why he fell down the confession trap and so on.
But then I'd also have like perfectionistic thoughts, um, like always like maybe looking at this, that, and the other, and being like sort of hypersensitive of that person.
Yeah.
But you just expose yourself to it, and as you expose yourself and you bring down these beliefs, they have a sensation on you. So where am I today? I'm at a far more peaceful point. I still experience some anxiety and stuff like that, but it's like a very low level, like in comparison to
Mm,
whatever. I've had no spikes in over 2 years. Um,
amazing.
and we, in fact,
And,
now, I
and if I
mean,
could just jump in there, Tom, if I can just jump in then. So how this is crucial with fear of fear. So how do you view, I know we've been working on this together, how do you view suffering in general? So are you scared of having a setback? Are you scared of having a wobble? And we've been working on that, haven't we? So how's that looking?
yeah, so you've got to get yourself to a certain mindset where you're not in a place where you never not expect it. You're not waiting for it. Absolutely not. You're not like every day I'm waiting for it.
Yeah.
But if it were to come back again, um, I could accept it and I would understand that I'm in a better position to deal with the situation because of the tools I now have. So
Hmm.
I don't ever expect it not to come back. But
Hmm.
if it did come back, I would feel a lot more confident dealing with those sensations because I've got the tools, the understanding of how we should deal with these things, and I will push myself to tolerate that discomfort without giving in, well, to go back to compulsive or reassurance ways.
Right. So a lot of it is the more internally allowing, right? It's like a free flowing. It's like, okay, come on in, rather than the internal control, like the gripped in, locked on, like this can't come back. Because then if it does come back, which it most likely will with that kind of attitude, it's going to hit you hard, right? Now, Tom, would you say, because you are very rational now in how you think, from what I hear in the coaching calls that we have, that would you see that if even if it did came back, would you see it as, hey, this is what I need to break down? This is where my beliefs are maybe a bit faulty, right? This is where I'm doing the compulsion again, right?
Totally. I think I could recognize irrational belief from a mile away now. I hear it every day.
Wow.
It's like, like it just hits me, and I'm like, well, what? But the beauty is, if something comes over me now, it's like, what am I thinking? It's not them. It's what am I doing to create that, to give
Yeah.
that the fuel. So I
You did
straight
an
away like, if
excellent
I get a
post on
spike,
that.
that's coming from me. So
Yeah.
I know I need to like obviously sit with the discomfort for now, but at another time if it's really that bad, I can try and break it down and go, well, why did that disturb you so much? Like, go through the ABCs, stuff like that. But not that I do that anywhere near as much as I used to. I don't feel the need to, but like I would feel very confident in that position.
Wow. You did an excellent post in the group. It was a couple of weeks ago now in the WhatsApp group that you're in, talking about how, like you just said then, the biggest shift from you has come from, hang on a minute, I'm accountable for my own disturbance here. Like, even if you had a massive wobble tomorrow morning, the biggest thing that Tom's saying there is that he knows that it's down to me and I disturb myself, right? It's not to say you're undisturbable. It doesn't. It's not to say like you're like some kind of robot that can never have a wobble. Tom's fully accepting of having a wobble, but he realized that if that wobble happens, it's down to him and what needs work. And the main thing is that you're just letting time pass when that happens, and that he's not frantically looking, oh, what am I doing wrong? Right. And he made a very good point there that just not engaging with those feelings, not fighting them, not resisting them, not pushing them away. And then over time, understanding that, hey, I've disturbed myself here by my perception. And that is life changing. It changed my life, Tom. Once I realized that it's me, I depress myself, right? I make myself feel chronically guilty and shameful, right? I make myself feel anxious. Then you stop blaming external factors. You start going, oh, that thing made me depressed, or that thought made me anxious, or this thing happening in the past made me guilty. Well, no, it can contribute to how you feel. It's your perception, which is key. And you said one thing in that post, which I really like, and you went, you ended it with this. You said, unconditional acceptance is like a superpower. Just elaborate on that, Tom.
Well, it just is.
Like,
It's
you're like
when,
Superman with the unconditional acceptance cape on.
yeah, well, exactly. It's just like it's when you think of unconditional acceptance, you don't need any, like, you don't. We only when you realize you only need like what, food, water, and shelter. You essentially, I'm not like a monk or something. I'm not super amazing self-acceptance, but like when you understand unconditional self-acceptance, life and other acceptance, it reduces a lot of the stresses of life, in the
Yeah,
sense, like, a lot of it, if it's in your control, you can do something about it. If it's not in your control, you don't need to. I mean, you can't, just got to go with the flow, and that's like acceptance of life, and
yeah.
that we can't
And
control those
why
things.
was that? Why was that particularly relevant for your ROCD, Tom? The fact that you could be at fault for somebody else getting emotionally harmed. Why was unconditional self-acceptance so critical then? I know I'm putting you to the test, but this is so important for people to hear.
Well, it was important because unconditional self-acceptance, did you say?
Yeah, especially for ROCD, because there's so many people watching this with ROCD. It's a very common theme.
Well, you got put me on the spot. Basically,
Pressure's on.
yeah. Well, when it comes to ROCD and unconditional self-acceptance, you got to understand that it's all inside you. So when you have all these thoughts about your, maybe your partner, or thoughts about what you have for your partner, you realize, like, you're a fallible human being who's, so if you have perfectionist views as well, maybe it's like you have flaws as well. Accepting, like, other people are not perfect, and when you put those unrealistic standards on them, you're actually disturbing yourself again. So when you apply unconditional acceptance uh, to others as well, you sort of reduce that need for them to be that perfect way. But equally,
Yeah,
when you have that self-acceptance, you can accept yourself for those intrusive thoughts. So if you have a thought and you're like, oh, that's a dreadful thought. Why have I had that? That's terrible. That's going to mean X, Y, and Z. For me now, I can have those thoughts and they'll be gone like that. I don't latch onto them. So I don't
mm,
accept, I don't believe myself dreadful. I don't believe I
yeah,
shouldn't be having these thoughts. I don't think that, because I
yeah.
accept them to happen.
That's so important. Now, Tom, did you struggle on the unconditional acceptance not meaning agreement? Right? Because many people struggle with that because they say, well, if I'm accepting myself for having these thoughts, does that mean I want the thoughts? How did you tackle that element?
Well, I mean, I suppose from the get-go, I was very open to the system you guys applied. So when I thought acceptance not agreement, I thought it was also a really important point. It's like, once you realize that you don't, like, acceptance doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean like you like it, you understand that you don't like it, and you prefer not to have these things, but you understand that you don't need them. Okay, you don't need
Yeah,
these things. So acceptance is like, yes, I do have these thoughts. Do I particularly want to have them? No, not really. But does it mean that it's the end of the world? No. um
mm,
am I going to die because of them?
yeah.
No.
And there's a lot of
Oh,
self-rating as well, like labeling yourself as a bad person for having these thoughts, or like an unworthy person, or maybe I'm unworthy of this relationship because of these thoughts. So you were overgeneralizing. Just because a thought came in, you're going, well, that's it. I have to leave the relationship. Well, hang on a minute. That's 0 to
yeah,
100. That's very extreme.
this absolutely must be true, or something like
Yeah,
that. Or I must, because I keep having this thought, it must be right. It's that
yeah.
masturbation and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, and you've got to be very stoic with that kind of fear because trouble is, it's latched to the responsibility aspect, doesn't it? Because it's gone, yeah, but what if you're responsible for somebody else's downfall? It's just like it's harm OCD, but just in a different way linked into ROCD.
Mm.
So when I say he had to be very stoic because he's had to understand that even if his actions did cause their emotions, that humans disturb themselves, right? And that's obviously very hard for people to hear when you're irrational, because people are constantly blaming everybody else. Now, of course, somebody else's actions can affect you. Of course they can, right? If I was beat up in the street, of course, I can't say that's just me because I'm beat up in the street, right? They physically harm me, right? But for me to be emotionally disturbed will be down to my beliefs. If I'm depressed over that, it'll be because, oh, they shouldn't have done that. It's terrible they've done that. My life is over now. I just can't stand the fact that I've been beaten up. And that's what I'm saying here. So humans then disturb themselves by how they view stuff. So that's what's critical, the understanding that, hey, I really do not want to emotionally harm my partner, anybody else. I don't want to cause them disturbance. So it's understanding that Tom hasn't got to a place where he's just gone, I don't care how I act. I don't care how reckless I am. That's not true at all. It's understanding that, hey, even if I did do something that caused harm to them, which I really don't want to do, but even if I did, I'd have to remember that, number one, they would disturb themselves by their beliefs. But also, I have to learn to accept myself, even if I was frustrated with my actions, and ultimately, I'm going to have to move on, right? Because you can't control how others view something. That is not saying that Tom wanted to do something wrong. It's not to say he'd go out of his way to act carelessly. He doesn't want to do that. This is where acceptance is an agreement. But even if that happened, you have to break down worst case scenario and how Tom could still rebuild, overcome that, and ultimately how his partner could still overcome that.
That was actually a massive part of my process as well, as breaking that down because of obviously the
Yeah.
guilt levels I'd feel. So
Yeah.
if you have like very high guilt about your partner or potentially something like that,
Yeah.
that was humongous, sort of getting to the point where like, okay, I caused that action. I'm not happy that I did do that action, but her reaction is ultimately hers alone. And even though I'm not happy that I did what I did, if I did do something, for example,
Mm.
I wouldn't be responsible for like how she reacted to a degree.
Yeah.
So that
Which is
took
hard.
away a lot of
And
the responsibility.
that's a hard fear to confront, as are they all with OCD. But you can tell OCD is latched to the responsibility angle there. It's like, yeah, but if you've done this and you've caused them emotional, mental harm, then that's it. You're written off, Tom. Your life is done for. Right. So he's had to gradually unpick this and understand that, hey, that it's my beliefs which is disturbing myself around how I've emotionally harmed them. And I know that can sound like a complicating concept to grasp, but this is where it takes time, right? You're not going to come off this video and go, right, I've nailed it now. I'm not going to feel any guilt or shame, because what you learn in the reading list, especially the third book, The Myth of Self-Esteem, as to how humans can't rate themselves for these particular things. So please don't think you can force changing beliefs, right? And I'm sure Tom can vouch for this. The main thing that one should do when they're trying to get better is looking at what it is they can't accept, looking at what they're rational about. So ultimately, when they're triggered, when they're disturbed, what does it boil down to? What fears is it? And this is why it's important to reach out for help, because we can help identify that for you if you're really struggling to see what you're actually scared of. And ultimately, if you're doing compulsions, then you're going to stay stuck in the cycle. Like if Tom kept seeking reassurance from his partner, if Tom kept confessing, he might as well chuck all the belief work in the bin, because then it just shows he doesn't believe his new philosophy because he's still doing compulsion. So they come hand in hand. And ultimately, Tom, his structure, right? You know, we talked about this on our calls, haven't we? How you've worked on your structure, your career, for example, focus on other books in your life. And ultimately, you're using the tools just for all areas of your life, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's actually got to a point where it's expanding out into my bigger life, where we've gone beyond the sort of ROC aspects of life and just looking at my whole life in general and
Yeah.
how I can sort of improve it. So this process has not only just helped me with that, it's helped my life in the sense of like how I live it, the way I approach it,
How
um,
to grow a mustache.
how to grow. Well, it's still struggling with that one, but I think I'll always struggle with that one, to be honest. Accepting myself for my mustache growth,
Yeah.
you know.
You're a fallible human.
Fallible facial hair.
Cool. So Tom, what would you? We're going to leave it on this because we've got 5 minutes left of this meeting before it runs out. So, if you, and this is critical, if you were watching this video right now, and it obviously wasn't you on here, and you were struggling, it was back when you were really stuck at rock bottom of OCD. What advice would you want to hear? What would you want to be told? right? Meaning that what would you tell your old self, Tom, if you were watching this video?
Wow. I would,
Have a think about it. You've got 5 minutes before this
yeah,
meeting runs
five
out.
minutes. I would tell myself to look at yourself and try and get down to the core of that worst case scenario. What am I
Mhm.
really afraid of?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what you guys tell everyone all the time, but it's true. I mean, it is. It's just look at yourself. What are the fears you have? Let's start breaking those down. Learn to accept yourself having those thoughts. Learn to accept other people for having their own personal
And
fallible flaws.
you're never agreeing with the thoughts. You never get to a stage where you like the thoughts, right? It's just
Exactly.
learning to accept them being there, not trying to fight them.
Yeah, exactly. That was a massive thing. It's just like recognizing, but like not trying to push it away. So just let it be there. Um, have compassion for yourself because it can get hard at times and it is a long process. But like understand that it is difficult and you just got to give yourself that sort of like you're trying to do something really hard and the fact that you're doing that is gonna help you as well. Um, and I would just give it time,
That is the
repetition and
main
time.
ingredient, isn't it? It's the main ingredient. This can't be forced. Tom's got to a stage. Now, how long have you been in, Tom? When was your
So
first one come on?
literally, I think it was October 2022. I
Right.
think I had my
You're
first phone
talking
call
over 2 years. Over 2 years.
crying to Rob, and
Over
yeah,
2 years.
and then 2 years
So
later,
that's you need a dose of realism, don't you? Tom's in a much better place, but it's going to take time. You can't try and rush a process like shifting perspectives, changing our beliefs on the worst case scenario, cutting compulsions, because these are kind of beliefs and behaviors that's kept you stuck your whole life, right? It's not something that's going to just change like that, right? So you've got to know that it's going to take time and patience, but also know that hey, if you're really going for it right now, you're really, really not alone, right? There's so much hope. And
mm.
Tom, when you feel alone, right, when you just take it one day at a time, is there any advice you'd give to somebody right now if they feel like they just can't possibly go on with these thoughts around ROCD, around their partner, and so on? What would you tell them if they're at a crisis point?
Oof, at a crisis point.
Or what can you do at a crisis? And they can relate to you significantly with the thoughts that you're having or that you had. What would you advise them? Just get through the day?
To help them get through the day. Um, the fact that you're in the thick of it, feeling that burn, that discomfort, and enduring it, not doing the compulsions, not looking for reassurance. If you can do that, then you're actually doing the battle. You're doing the fight. You are enduring that discomfort, working towards that thing. So when you're at the end of the day and you're still feeling that fear of impending doom, that sensation that everything is like too much, you're in the thick of the battle now and you're doing something about it. And even if you do mess up and you do some compulsion, so on and so forth, the fact that you recognize these things as what they are is also a step towards the direction you need to be heading. All right. It's actually understanding like that was something I wish I didn't
Yeah,
do it, but then you did. And then having compassion for yourself in those positions. So just
yeah.
bear that in mind. So when you're on the lowest low, you are in the thick of it and you're actually doing something about it. So don't
Well,
give up. Keep pushing.
one one day at a time. This is why structure's key. Having that healthy structure in place for when you're really in the thick of it, when you're really in the midst of OCD suffering, it's keeping up that structure regardless. Right?
Yeah.
When I was
Repetition.
stuck, the first thing that went when I used to have a bit of a slip up would be my structure. It went down the toilet. So
Oh yeah.
the first thing I had to prioritize is even when I was suffering, keep up that healthy structure. But this meeting's about to end, Tom, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up. Tom, been really, really good speaking to you. Your journey has been so interesting, so relatable for many that are listening, many that are watching. So that's been really, really cool. Thanks ever so much for coming on. And if you are interested in one-to-one coaching calls, please email phil@ocdrecovery.com and you can get in touch with one of the coaches here and book in a session as soon as we possibly can. Anyway, thanks, Tom, and we'll speak again. Bye bye.
Thank you, Sam. Cheers. Bye bye.